Hi, everyone. I've been doing these tours of the German colonies in the Middle East, and it's been, an interesting research project for me for several years now. It started when I lived when I lived in Israel, and when I came to Georgia, I had no idea there were seven. Well, some claim six, but I would say, okay, up to seven German colonies on the territory of Georgia only. There's also Azerbaijan and there's some other areas, but so I so far have been able to visit only three. And I thought it would be a good idea to actually take you there once again, but I've made it into one tour, pretty concise. And these places are not really touristy, which is great. I like not touristy places, and these places have so much history. So we're going to spend the Friday, like use it on all my tours. Looks like my internet connection is a little bit unstable, but seems to be working okay. Just let me know if something goes wrong, but should be fine. You know what? Just to be on the safe side, I will allow the chat just in case. Okay? Let me just make sure. Well, so far everything is good. Well, just keep me posted, just in case. Yeah, and if you look a little bit below Tbilisi, you will see a town of Rustavi. So Rustavi is kind of the center, the biggest city in that region. It's not really far from Tbilisi. Basically, it's one of the towns we're visiting is somewhat 40 minutes drive from Tbilisi, and the next one, Bolnisi, is about 1 more hour. This is kind of the map of the southern central area of Georgia. So you see Tbilisi, and a little bit lower than that, southern than that, we're going to be not far from Rustavi for Asureti neighborhood, and then we're heading to Bolnisi, which is a bigger town with, again, I would say very German past. But I have to take you to Indonesia first. Why on earth? So 1815, the volcanic eruption of Tambora was I'm not joking. This is exactly um that's the I'm not joking. If you just even if you just check Wikipedia, you will see that that volcanic eruption of 1815 was the largest eruption in recorded history. And this caused the following year, the year without summer, on the big territory of the world, almost the entire Europe, and it caused the global cooling because of the ashes that were given off in the atmosphere, very thick, and these ashes reached stratosphere. That was a big deal. And shortly before that, there was Napoleonic Wars, and there were outbreaks of different diseases almost every summer. A lot of people saw it as really bad signs, especially pious Christians, especially in the southern areas of Germany. There came about smaller groups, let's say within the Lutheran communities, that started seeing it as the signs of the end of days. And there were also other communities, not only in Germany, but also across Europe. In general, Christian church went through, we know that the Christian church has gone through periods of crisis multiple times, and it was just one of them. So there were a group in Germany. So we can say that these were, so to speak, one of those groups of so-called Second Adventists because they were waiting for the end of days, meaning the arrival of Messiah, of Jesus, and they decided that the end of days would take place in 1836, and it was like 1816. This is just the caldera of the volcano. Just like see it, just imagine. It was incredible. Uh, so people saw it as a very bad sign, which I can understand. This is the idea for you to see where we were traveling from Tbilisi, but that's on foot. So that distance, 7 hours, is on foot. By car, it's like 15 miles, really nothing, 29 kilometers, 15 miles, just that. So it was, people had really about 20 years before the expected end of days. So people in Germany, well, these groups of Germans said, well, we need to go to Jerusalem to see Messiah. But the problem was they couldn't get there because of the Ottomans. At that point, the Ottomans still kept the area, well, the area of the state of Israel, well, the future state of Israel, or that point called Palestine, as you know, it's a region, not the state, right? I'm just saying it again and again. They would still keep it closed, to close access to it. So Germans decided, okay, if they couldn't go to Jerusalem, they could at least go to Ararat Mountain, where Noah's Ark was believed to have been hiding, as now I would say the scholarly society believes that Ararat was not exactly that mountain, but nevertheless, so at that point it was believed that the Noah's Ark was ended there after the Great Flood, and they were on their way to Armenia. However, they crossed the Caucasus, they crossed Georgia, and they just were stopped because the Ottomans, well, had also their interest on the territory of Armenia, and because of the battles, they couldn't get any further than Georgia. And Georgia at that time was part of the Russian Empire already by that time. And the Germans were kind of stuck, but didn't want to go back. They actually had nowhere to go back to because back at home, they were considered a little bit too extreme, and they were almost excommunicated from the church. That didn't happen, but that definitely would have happened had they not left. So they couldn't really go back home, and they decided to stay on the territory of Georgia. And we are in the town of Asureti. This is the modern name, Asureti. We are in the Schwabenstrasse because, well, it was the region of Swabia where these particular Germans were from. And they just stayed in the town, and they named it, well, not Asureti. Asureti is a Georgian name. At that time, we're talking early 1820s. It was the reign of Emperor Alexander I, who magnanimously allowed Germans to settle in Georgia because it was actually to mutual interest. Well, Germans, technically speaking, just stayed there and waited for 1836. But Alexander couldn't care less about that because he wanted them to develop the very, very distant outposts of the country. And he allowed them to stay. He, actually allowed them not to pay taxes and provided them with the land, and actually also granted them I would say, a lot of, perks of all sorts. His wife, by the way, was Elizabeth. Kind of inspired this future German neighborhood, and this community, this colony, started to call themselves Elizabeththal, and they settled there, and they started building houses for themselves. First, of course, they were just simple wooden houses. But then, as time went by, as 1836 came and no end of days happened, they kind of started realizing that maybe they were wrong. Maybe they thought it would be 1936. Who knows? And then 2000, right? We've seen that, been there before. And eventually they started building life from scratch in the new place. And they started building it the way they knew how to build it. So that's why in Asureti and also in Bolnisi, you will see a lot of buildings constructed in this very German technique called Fachwerk. Basically, Fachwerk meant wooden beams, like wooden frames, and the spaces between the wooden beams would be filled with different materials. Well, could be felt, could be wool, could be also a combination of wood and some other materials. So Fachwerk was exactly that type of construction that was suitable in the southern areas of Germany, climate-wise, and also in Georgia. By the way, this is Manfred. Manfred is now the only German who lives in Asureti, and he has nothing to do with those Germans that came in 1820s, but he was a descendant of a German prisoner of war from the Nazi times, right? So he's but he left to Germany in the 90s, but then he met a woman, Georgian woman. He came to Georgia, they started a family, then they got divorced, but Manfred stayed. And he is now the only German living in this village because right now, Asureti, so there's not even Georgian name. Well, there is a Georgian name to this town now. Nobody calls it Elizabethtal. And here mostly live Georgians, mostly Georgians who came from the northern areas, mountainous areas of Racha. I did mention this region several times. It's a very distant region, not easily accessible during the winter. Well, we will be talking about the Soviet past, obviously, because it has a lot to do with the Soviet history. But we are now enjoying this, I would say, very serene walk in this neighborhood. We see a lot of restored buildings. Some of them are not yet restored, but definitely going to be. And they all now belong to Georgians. However, because of this German past, a lot of families have preserved the architecture of the buildings. And also there is this project carried out together with the EU, with Germany, the project on preservation of Asureti and Bolnisi German colonies. Well, the architectural preservation of the buildings. We have some photos from the late 19th century, from the 20th century period, and it remained a German colony up until 1941. Regardless of the First World War, collapse of the Russian Empire, Soviet Union, Bolshevik invasion, Germans remained there up until 1941. In late spring 1941, things went really, really sour. And within just several days, all the Germans, not only from Asureti, but actually other 7 communities, had to pack within several days and leave. So altogether, by 1941, there lived 4,000 German families on the territory of the entire Georgian Republic. That's a big deal. And they were involved in a lot sorts of businesses and activities, farming, winemaking, in general, agriculture. And for example, here, again, a Georgian family runs a small guest house in the German style. These buildings have been restored with the financial support of the government of Germany. So this is a big project carried out with EU. There are some souvenir stores, there are some, eateries, but largely this place is normally visited by German groups and just upon request. Some homes are less impressive, and it does feel a little bit like a ghost town, to be honest. But this church really does the job. It kind of really saves everything. This church, constructed in the end of the 19th century by a German architect. We actually don't know the name of the architect. It could be one of the architects. Well, 1871 is when they started the construction. It could be one of the architects from the community, or it could be one of the German architects who live in Tbilisi. We know a lot of them. That's still a question. We're not entirely sure. The church survived a big fire in 1920s, I think 1924, and only recently been restored. For a long time, it stood completely deserted and unattended. And the problem was that, this church kind of was not really even property of Georgia. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, eventually, so in actually in 2000, the Georgian church not like took over, but it was allowed for the Georgian church to get in charge of the restoration. And since there are no really Germans living in Georgia now, there's no communities. There was no need for the Lutheran church, and it's now a Georgian church. Well, this video was recorded 2 years ago. I haven't been there since, so I'm not sure if there's going to be any decoration on the walls, but it's highly unlikely. But from what I understood, they're going to use the space also as a little exhibition of the history of the Elizabethan community, which is great. And from what I understood, this exhibition was supposed to be on the second floor, on the second level, and the first floor, the first level would be simply the well, for the clergy, for the services. Now we're going upstairs, and we will see also what it looked like from above. The almost the entire dome eventually collapsed after the fire of 1920s, and then the church for some time stood without the dome. Have a look at the planning. Very straight. This is the central street, but actually there were more streets. The community was way bigger, but also you can see that now there are a lot of trees from the right, so you can see there used to be more houses. Everything is looking really not Georgian. Georgian town, Georgian villages are never really planned that straightforwardly and with the very, very straight lines. That's usually not like that. So it's still the German planning, definitely. And unfortunately, I'm not aware if there were any wall decorations, if there was any elements other than that colonnade over there. I'm not aware of that. We don't really have photos of that period. Well, right now, Asureti it does feel a little bit like a ghost town. However, well, there is a school not far from here. There are shops. Well, it's just a small village in a very scenic location. It's just, I mean, just look at these Trialeti mountains. Um, and it's only like 40 minutes by car from Tbilisi. So technically, to me, it's a beautiful getaway. These German colonies were also involved. There was a kind of connection between different communities, and they were all connected. However, the connection between the German communities in the Caucasus with the German community, well, let's say with Germany, I mean the Germany proper, was not really that maintained. And we also have photos of the colony from the Soviet period. They were very sporty. There was this cult, body cult in the 1930s. There were schools, there were hospitals. This was like a proper big village, like a very big village. Now, ghost town. It not exactly ghost town, but it does feel a little bit more like a getaway destination than a fully fledged neighborhood. Well, to me at least. I might have a little bit of a different perception of it, but compared to what it used to be, they had their orchestra, they had a big farm, they had wine production, they had a beer production, they exported the dairy products as well across the region. Big deal. Well, not anymore. So maybe I just keep comparing it to what it was back in the days, before the German colony was completely destroyed and eliminated. I mean, eliminated, not really destroyed physically, because as you see, the buildings have survived. There's one more thing, that's the cemetery. So obviously there had to be a cemetery, and the cemetery kind of survived. Um, can we say that it's looking the way it looked during with the Germans? Not exactly. I would say, well, you see, there is a cafe there. So 1818, this is the year when, well, it's one of the first colonies, and it wasn't, well, it's kind of 1818, this is the year of the establishing, but it would take several more years for the community kind of to be officially formed and to have more or less administration and whatsoever. But yeah, so the official it is believed like 1818. Imagine. So 1816, 1815, the volcanic eruption. 3 years later, these Germans already end up here. Big deal. So the mm, the the cemetery nowadays is also used by the Asureti, but the people live in Asureti, obviously. So it's not a German cemetery anymore. But the historic part, let's say the historical section of it, they tried to preserve as much as they could. During the Soviet period, of course, it wasn't that easy, and you can see a lot of just tombstones. Many of them you can still read the names on. It's a big deal. You can still read the names, but many are already in a very poor condition. Locals and also the volunteers from the German project, they clean them. They try to restore them. But the problem is that it's not so difficult. It's not so easy to locate the graves themselves. Some graves are still there. Some most probably not. Or they were removed. Well, like this one. Look at this. So these are just how shall I put it? Mm, well, tombstones with no graves, just like that. Yes, and obviously dogs everywhere. There are a lot of tombs that are designed like trees, as the tree of life. There are a lot of tombs with crosses or with both symbols, because we know that, well, faith, Christian faith is, well, and the symbol of Jesus for a long time was a boat, because kind of savior of the soul. And also, once you see the German cemetery, you will see the striking difference, because the Georgian cemetery is a little bit to the side, so they do not mix the graves, but uh, well, you can't really locate the graves. Most of the graves you can't locate anymore, unfortunately. So we mentioned some of the farms and wineries. So there was quite a big winery in Asureti. Uh, it's important to say that Kvemakart, the region, is not exactly the winest of the region, so to speak. Um, as you probably remember from my tours, there are about 500 endemic kinds of grapes that grow in Georgia. It's a soaring number. It's a crazy big number for such a small country. 500. How? I have no idea. But most of them do not really grow in Kremakartli. There was one German, however, his name was Otto Schall. He went for a walk. It was like 1830s, if I'm not mistaken, as far as I remember. And he just discovered a little uh, wild grape growth. He picked the grapes, brought them, and it just was discovered. And then it just came to their knowledge that those grapes were of a very rare and almost extinct variety of grapes. It was decided to call it Shal or Shala. Well, the name kind of um, got corrupted a little bit, so it's called Shala. And now this is the endemic kind of wine that, thanks to those Germans that managed to cultivate it, and saved those grapes. They turned it. They built a winery there, and this is the building from the German period and also Soviet period of the winery. Well, it's written in Russian because this is from the Soviet period. But the building itself was constructed in the German period, in the before the Soviets, so still in the 19th century. And Kvemakartli, because of this Shala variety of grapes, it started to grow really, really well here, and it started to bring a lot of harvest and a very good grapes. So, Kvemakartli became the region that supplied 10% out of all the Georgian, out of all the wine that was supplied to the Russian Empire from Georgia. It made up 10%, such a small and not really wine region. Also, not far from Asureti, like maximum like 7 minutes by car. It's not so easy to walk, but by car is only 7 minutes. There was located a station, a warehouse, and a station, kind of a car station, or also bus station during the Soviet period. That was kind of a transportation hub from where also wine and other products would be taken to other areas of Georgia and elsewhere. It was eventually redeveloped, well, thanks to the European Union funding and the United Nations Development Program. In this area was revamped and turned into a restaurant, a fusion of German and European cuisine. Well, the building was constructed originally in the German period and then was used throughout the Soviet period. Obviously, a lot more buildings of the warehouses were constructed during the Soviet period. I like the antique cupboard. Isn't it gorgeous? I fell in love with it. And the food there is quite interesting. And obviously, they serve Shalva variety of wine. Shala. And right now, Shala is considered one of this, well, not really extinct, but it's a rare variety. And only in Kvemakartli region, in Georgia, one can produce wine made from Shala variety, which is great. They are very careful with regards to their wines and what kinds of wines and viticulture could be used. And also on the walls, you see the photographs of life of Asureti in German period and also Soviet period. Well, now it's just a kind of one of the, again, Asureti is not really that touristy, but if you happen to be traveling, to other areas, you pass Bolnisi, you pass Asureti, and yeah, you'll definitely be stopping over there. But we move on. I am mindful of the time, so we need to be going to Bolnisi, which is like 1 hour drive, and that was beautiful, really, really, really scenic view from the windows of the car. I went with a small tour, and it feels like you are really into the wild, honestly. Bolnisi, it's also Georgian name of the neighborhood. Remember Alexander I, who was grandson of Empress Catherine the Great. In Asureti, they named themselves after the wife of Alexander, Elizabeth Tal. But in Bolnisi, those Germans named themselves Yekaterinenfeld after grandma Catherine the Great, grandma of Alexander I. However, during the Soviet period, it was absolutely out of question that Yekaterinenfeld name could not be used. So the Soviet government decided to name this city into Luxembourg, but not after a European town, but after Rosa Luxemburg, the one of the leaders of the emancipation movement and revolutionary, well, the communist movement in Germany. So this is Rosa Luxemburg. So in the middle of nowhere in Georgia, in the Kremakarta region, there was a Luxembourg all their own. And in the Soviet period, they turned all the farms into collective farms, well, former German farms, private farms. They turned them into kolkhoz, right? Collective farms. And there was a kolkhoz Luxembourg. Isn't it lovely, right? Anyway, so we are now walking down one of the streets in Bolnisi town. So it was Luxembourg, but then in the modern period, in the post-Soviet period, the city was called Bolnisi, and there used to be a church. One may say, Anna, but we do remember that in Israel, those German colonies, they were mostly Templar colonies and there were no churches. Well, in some of them there were churches, but you're right. So those were Templars, but those communities would come about in the second half of the 19th century. They were different. So the pioneers of the settlement would be these Germans. And they didn't consider themselves Templars. They needed a church, and they built those churches. Well, this is what's left of the building. So this gray building is the Soviet period, obviously. This is well, from the left-hand side, this is like what the building looked like. And well, in the Soviet period, the building of the church was looted, partially destroyed, but from the back, you could see there is, still, well, you see the apse of the church, right? You can still see this was some sort of a religious building. It was, you could see that, but having been deprived of all the religious attributes, of all the crosses and so on. So it was turned into a gym. And it's a sports center now, fortunately. Yeah. So you could see on the street signs the wine house, the wine center. So in Bolnisi, there were so many wine farms, wineries, starting from the 19th century. The thing is that, well, we know that Georgians have been making wine for 8,000 years. Well, whoever lived on the territory before Georgians, so they started making wine, not Georgians themselves. But the Georgian technique is qvevri, right? It's the clay pots. But Germans, they started making wooden barrels because they didn't know. How on earth would they know how to make wine Georgian way? And why would they want to be making wine Georgian way if they were Germans? So they decided to be using this local varieties of wine, including the Shala, which they were so successful in cultivating. They decided to be making wine in the European way that they knew very well, just wooden barrels. And this is how dozens of wineries were established. And there was the Bolnisi wine became, well, the Yekaterinenfeld wineries kind of united into one big conglomerate. And it made Yekaterinenfeld one of the richest, among the richest of the German communities in the entire Caucasus. You can still see that some of these buildings still look European, right? They still don't look very Georgian. Sorry. Sorry. Again, a very typical view. You see, it was a much bigger colony. Have a look. It was way bigger than Asureti. You can see the church. You can see that where the main road was. And look at all these houses. And again, straight lines, straight lines that would run along and across. It looked like crosses. That was the idea. Very German, and that's how all the colonies actually looked. Bolnisi, well, Ekaterina, in fact, I could be calling it Bolnisi, but it wouldn't be exactly correct because it wasn't called that way back then, but you get the point. So Yekaterinenfeld was one of the richest colonies, and it was responsible for those 10%. Let's say 8% of the out of 10 was actually the Yekaterinenfeld wine. As for the houses, some of the houses we know even to whom it belonged. Mainly, it would be so one house for one family, and each of these houses had a wine cellar. It's pretty much how it still works. In Georgia, especially in some regions such as Kakheti, which is the winest of the regions, every house has a cellar, and nearly every family knows how to make wine. That is true. That goes without saying. And Germans was the same. So in Bolnisi, in Ekaterinenfeld, everyone had a wine cellar, and everyone could produce wine and produced wine. Well, again, right now in Bolnisi live Georgians. There are no German descendants because none of them stayed. By the way, that's the Zachman house of Franz Zachman, one of the seniors of the community. And yes, there were churches. There was church. There was schools. There was hospitals. There was connection with other communities as well. A lot of holidays, a lot of celebration. But again, not this much connection with Germany. Well, and that's well the big difference with the Middle East because of this connection with Germany, especially closer to the turn of the 20th century. Well, this ties with Germany in the Middle East and within German communities and also the Ottomans eventually led, to the support of the First World War. But here, when the First World War broke out, so we also know the names of the people who lived in these houses. Now Georgians, but it actually was the Wagner family, one of the big suppliers of wine, Wagner's. When the First World War broke out, here no Germans were evicted, no Germans were forced to move, to flee, or anything. We know that when the First World War broke out, Nicholas II commissioned I'm just sharing the names of the people who lived in this house, but in some cases we don't really know any more than that. Sometimes we do. So Nicholas II, it did rename St. Petersburg, so it sounded too German, so he renamed it into Petrograd. And looks like there was a plan to actually relocate, to transfer German colonists elsewhere outside of the Russian Empire. However, Nicholas II never got round to it because he was too busy, being the commander-in-chief of the Eastern Front. So that never happened. And also it's important to remember, like in Bolnisi, in the Ekaterinenfeld, they also lived Georgian. And they were even mixed marriages, by the way. It wasn't, let's say, prohibited. It wasn't encouraged, but it wasn't prohibited either. There were mixed marriages. And Germans were seen as part of the community. And that's why when the World War broke out, nobody saw these Germans as possible threats, as triaders of any sort. Nobody, no Georgian ever really stands that. And the question is why, when the Bolsheviks took over, we know that in early 1920s, so the Bolsheviks invaded, we know the story. So why did the Bolsheviks let the Germans stay? That's a good question. Um, we don't really know 100% why that happened, but it's highly likely that it's simply because the Bolsheviks were more scared of the Georgians, not willing to comply, not willing to kind of resisting the Bolshevik rule in the country, whereas Germans never really caused any issues, and they just kept doing their fair share, and that was it. What I'm showing you now is it's a restored building. We will see it shortly. But before that, I would like to show you one of those wine cellars. Remember? So I said that in nearly every house there was a wine cellar. This is one of those wine houses. And yes, some buildings are still waiting to be restored. Um, there are there are several more streets with these old buildings, but in general, not all the German houses survived of Bolnisi, unfortunately. So there are not that many as you saw in those black and white photographs. So that wine cellar belonged to the family of Ernst Almendinger. We saw one of the houses where the family lived. That's another house of the Almendinger family. Very big family, very rich, and they were one of the uh, producers of wine and also brandy, by the way. And these are actually their how shall I put it? That's their um, bottle covers, designs, labels, and so on. Well, for example, they even produced Riesling. Well, this one is already from the Soviet period because here it says the table wine from Luxembourg, well, like Luxembourg table wine, but Luxembourg not because of Luxembourg, right, the country, but because of Rosa Luxembourg. And this is the Riesling that they produced in the imperial times, still in the imperial times. And so you will see that Almendinger had a really, really big wine cellar, had a really big manufacturer, and they were just one of many that used to be located in Bolnisi. It's just me, enjoying this beautiful furniture set. This place is huge. There's like a whole room now not used. This place is not used for winemaking. It's more like an exhibition place. Well, that room is not even open for visits. It was just it's kind of used as a storage, as a storeroom for all sorts of, useless things. And look at the cellar, really big. And also all these German wine manufacturers had to produce barrels because nobody else in Georgia produced wooden barrels but Germans. And some of those barrels are believed to have been from the times of the winery. Great. Cellars from the 19th century. They all used to be filled up. They all used to, well, they were all in use and they belonged to Almendinger family. Now it's more like a museum space, but also you can rent this place for all sorts of activities. But it's so big, and there are several more rooms that we were not able to visit. It's the amazing thing is also it was built so that all year round there is one and the same constant temperature there. I don't remember which exactly, maybe 22, something like that, or 20. I don't remember, but it's one and the same temperature. This is kind of a little visitor center with a little bit of this exhibition of some of the items that are still there, like the wooden barrels, or this is like the little manual wine press, for example, that one can move and just try. It's probably a copy, not the original, manual wine press. I'm not 100% sure, but it looks actually very original, so maybe it is. But I don't know. And some of the wooden barrels are original. That's true. That's what we were told. It's not like, they arrange some sort of, big excursions there. Technically speaking, it's now run by one of the families, and since it's just a museum, well, one comes, and calls a phone number, and this family who's in charge of this little exhibition just opens the door, and you just walk and explore on your own. I'm still not over those views. It's just so breathtaking. There's a little monastery on the top, but we are not going there. And remember, we saw a modern building, so we're heading there now. This is a newly restored house that belonged to also one very influential family in Yekaterinenfeld. I'm not sure if you can see it, so I'll move it a little bit. So the Walker family, the house of Emanuel Walker. Emanuel Walker was one of the heads of the community. By the way, that's what this house looked like originally. Pretty much the same. I don't think that the doors were blue and the window frames were yellow. I kind of doubt that, but the house looks pretty much the same. And they were also very big wine producers. And this photo taken in Bolnisi. I'm not sure if it's 100% only the Walker's wine, but it was taken in Bolnisi in the Ekaterinenfeld. That's true. 100%. And this house was restored, and it's now actually the office, like the how shall I put it, the headquarters of the Union of Winemakers of Bolnisi. A lot of local wineries united, and they now represent, and now like all make up one union of Bolnisi winemakers. And they chose this house of Emanuel Walker as their headquarters. There is no wine production in this house. It's more like a place for tastings, for negotiations, a little museum, and there is even a little bar on the upper floor. Again, just for tasting. So it's all for networking and for, tourist purposes. So unlike Asureti, Bolnisi is pretty touristy. Well, more like original, let's say more like internal tourism, but external as well. And also they run a wine festival every year. And this is where you can taste a lot of Shala wine, from this endemic kind of wine named after Otto Schaller, the German who accidentally discovered this wine, these grapes on his walk. Look how big Bolnisi was, Katerinenfeld. Very big. It's not that big anymore. Well, it's big, but not all the German houses survived. When they started cleaning the walls after the Soviet period, they discovered the frieze decoration, and they decided to keep it, and they just restored it a little bit. But it used to be, I think it was the bedroom of the Emanuel Walker. and photographs, photographs, photographs of the people of Bolnisi. Big community, very strong, involved in a lot of activities, not only work but that as well. So it and in the Soviet period, it became the kolkhoz, the collective farm of Luxembourg, because it couldn't be called Katerinenfeld anymore, for sure. The question is, what happened in uh, what was like for the Germans in the 30s and in the 40s before the big changes came about. In throughout the 1930s, actually, well, there would be photographs, by the way, of Bolnisi football team that once won a championship in the Soviet Union, the Bolnisi football team. And Bolnisi didn't feel like a distant region, didn't feel like an isolated village. No, it was actually a big region, very developed. A lot of people, by the way, this is the original wood. Whatever could be saved, like this, this is the saved wooden beams, the original wooden beams. The Germans didn't bring them with them. We know that Americans did bring some wood to Jaffa, to the colony, but Germans didn't do that. No, Germans just built from the local materials. So on the upper floor here on the attic, there is like a little bar and a little tasting room, and the views at the Trialeti Mountain. Look at the roof. Look at these roofs with the well, probably just restored gables. And yes, of course, they were also production of construction materials, because someone had to be producing the construction materials, just so that the colonies could build each other. And also there was they supplied everything to Georgians outside of the region, everywhere. And also we were set then for a little tasting. But this is, again, it's a shop. It's like a tasting room. It's not winery itself. And it was very good. Lots of wine, chala, obviously, but not only. And also there is a hotel. As I said, this place is way more touristy than Asureti. And this hotel is in the restored house that used to be a hospital. One of the families at work in 1939, when the war started in Europe, nothing changed here. Life went on. There was no tension. There was no persecution whatsoever. And some of these photos were actually taken like days before before the big deportation day. And by the way, yes, they also have these lovely elements called Menschelachs, in Yiddish, like little men. It was a German tradition, for these shutter stoppers. And I didn't expect to find them in Bolnisi, but yeah, we found them. That was quite impressive. I don't know whether they had them in Asureti. I I don't know. So in 1941, Stalin signed a document, an order that within like 4 days, just imagine, 40,000 Germans had to pack and leave. In 4 days. That was a lot. That was a lot. Because it was done in such a hurry, there were no really, I would say, clear rules as to what could be taken uh, also a lots of like sports activities. I said they were very sporty. They were football championships, races, bike ra- bike races, basketball championships, all sorts of things. They were very sporty, very very active in everything, not just working, but in every walk of life. And yes, there was obviously their own fire brigade, firefighters brigade. And because they were all packing in a great hurry, that well, some people could take more, some people could take less, but you can't take your home with you. You can't take your cow with you. You can't take a barrel filled with wine. You just cannot. And people weren't really given much choice. They could take, some valuables, some warmer clothes, but they had no idea where they were going. So that's the football team that won the championship in the 30s. I don't remember which year exactly, but uh, it, that's the team. I think this is the photo from maybe Moscow. I'm not entirely sure, but the championship was in Moscow, so it was the Soviet Union proper. So eventually, within 4 days, all the people were deported, taken elsewhere, but they had no idea where they were going. Well, this is, by the way, a theater performance. Very active culture life, sport life, culture life, everything. So eventually, we know that they were all taken to the south of Kazakhstan, like the very, very distant outpost of the Soviet Union. And the people were just left there with their belongings in this. Well, it's not really the desert. It's like the steppes, just the steppe. And I'll just tell you one story that I would say illustrates how bad things were. Remember the Almendinger family, right? So we saw the wine cellar that belonged to them, uh, the one that's kind of a small exhibition. So this is Christina Almendinger with the daughters Anna and Ida. So they also were given 3 days to pack and leave. And in their house, also a Georgian woman rented a room. As I said, there were also Georgians living in Bolnisi, so there was a Georgian woman that rented a room, and she also worked for them. And they started packing, and they were just as they were about to load everything on the car and leave. That lady stopped them, Georgian woman, stopped them and told them to wait. She brought a rug from her room that she had, just a rug. These are by the way, this is the photo of the Almendinger family as well. So these are the workers of the Almendinger family. And these are the German women. So this photograph was taken a couple of days before the deportation started. And she brought them that rug, and they took it with them. And then everyone was loaded, in the big on the train and taken to Kazakhstan. And then they just got off the train in the middle of nowhere, just a steppe, just a wilderness, and they had to build homes for themselves from mud bricks because there was nothing else available. And yes, they were watched, they were guarded, but nobody was helped. And then eventually everyone was actually just left. And that's it. And then many years later, we know that Georgian woman, so she had a family. So Ekaterina Alexandrova just provided this photograph. So the daughter of that woman that stayed with them received a message, and the photograph, this photograph of a wedding of Herman Almendinger, who was the son of one of the sisters Almendinger. That and he wrote in that letter that without that rug, he wouldn't have survived. He wouldn't have been born. He wouldn't have survived the heat, the cold, and the heat, and there wouldn't have been this wedding. So that rug that woman um, gave to the Almendinger family saved the family from the cold nights because people just had to live in the fields. The documents regarding the deportations in the Soviet Union in the archives are still sealed, and they're going to be sealed for another 45 years or so. I'm opening the chat for your questions. Oh, the chat has never been closed, actually. I'm hoping they're still here. I knew this. Hi, Dolly, by the way. Sorry, I didn't see you join. I knew that this tour would not really be interesting to many, but I still felt I had to share this because it's, for me, it's a very interesting topic, and it's been, well, a research I devoted a lot of my time. So I wanted to share it once again. Many people have no idea that, many Germans even have no idea that there were German colonies in Georgia. Well, now a little more people know. So before we wrap this up, let me share with you the links. In 20 minutes from now, I will be taking you to St. Petersburg, to my stomping grounds, Bolshoi Avenue, or the Big Avenue. And also, I will be taking you to a fan museum. What fun, right? And for tomorrow, I'm taking you for a one-off live stream in a lavender farm. I was allowed, to do a live stream from there. Well, it's I don't know what to expect. I haven't been there before, but I absolutely have to take you there. It's a lovely area. There's also a village, so we're hoping to walk around. I'm taking a car. We're renting a car. I'm going with a friend. I'm also gonna be visiting other places before, filming it just to show you more places of Georgia. I'll be sharing stories, and I don't know, I might even go live at some point during the day. But if you follow me on my Instagram, if you follow me on my YouTube, you won't miss that. And in case you missed my live streams from earlier today, especially the rooftop exhibition and the market, you absolutely have to check it out. It was really, really, really lovely. Oh, Dola, I had no idea you didn't have an internet. Well, just in case, the recordings are available. The rooftop festival is available, and well, within 24 hours or in 24 hours, also the Solo Lucky tour will be available on Well Virtual Tours. I'm happy you're here. I'm happy you have your internet back. Thank you, Marilyn. I'm happy that you found it interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Judy. Yes, it's okay. Well, many people have no idea of that. Even Germans have no idea of that. Um, well, uh, well, even from my story, I used to learn German. I used to even attend a crash course in German. It was just me, kind of a part of my, I don't know, I was bored. I had nothing to do on my summer holidays, and I just, enrolled for a crash course in German for 3 months. And there was a family from Kazakhstan, and I asked them, and they were actually the descendants of those Germans from Kazakhstan. I had no idea what Germans did in Kazakhstan because it was in Siberia where I was born, where I lived until the 22. And so they told me that they came to Siberia from Kazakhstan, and like and what I asked them, like what they had been doing in Kazakhstan, what Germans had been doing in Kazakhstan. They couldn't even like answer properly. And now I actually understand that maybe they didn't even know a lot of things because they had to be hiding them during the Soviet period. Or maybe the family just well, maybe they didn't go the time, maybe they didn't want to share the story with me. I don't know, but now I understand how those Germans ended up in Kazakhstan. Dolly, I would rather think that it's just, your house not having an internet, which could happen, which could happen. So I have I shared with you all the links? Yes, I have. So in 15 minutes from now, well, 17-ish minutes from now, I'm taking you to St. Petersburg and 3 tours tomorrow. The lavender farm, maybe some short streams on my YouTube or Instagram, during the day, but I can't guarantee that. I'm definitely filming, some interesting sites, but the rest I don't know. But lavender farm for sure. Then Misha will be talking about a very interesting period of the post-Stalin era called thaw, a little, really political warming, so to speak. And then I'm taking to the Tower of David Museum. Thank you, Marilyn. As you know, I would appreciate your support. I would be really grateful for your PayPal donations or for your coffees. And I can't wait to catch up with you in my hometown. Virtually, but okay. Bye bye. Thank you so much.